and it's recording. And then there should be a red one here. Look at that. Recording. Ani, Fred Maba. This evening we brought in a man that I really truly admire. One of our tribal leaders, one of our tribal elders now, though he claims to be young. But I'd like to introduce you to Frank Ettawageshik and have him introduce himself and tell a little story about himself, maybe where his name came from, and we'll do some questions and answers with Frank. Miigwech for coming, Frank.
Ani, pipigwa ododem, Ettawageshik kondishnakas, waganaksin donjaba. The sparrowhawk is the mark of my family, my clan, and Noonday is my name. It's a name that I carried, that my grandfather also carried, and I'm from the place of the Crooked Tree, which is all of this area from, well, basically here to Mackinac, all along the shoreline, with the center being out at Goodhart. There was a naming ceremony when I was not quite a year old that was held down in Indiantown in Harbor Springs at the house that was the Kishigo house. It was right there in the center. It was Joe and Elizabeth Kishigo. And I was given this name, Ettawageshik, at a ceremony there, which was held at the return dinner in the spring. And this year, the Three Kings dinner has been, of course, on the 6th of January when Williams was having. But the return dinner was very early. It was in February, and that was where I was given this name. And when they did the ceremony, the namer went to the four directions and announced the name. And as we do with the ceremonies that we have that we see today. But in this case, at the end of the ceremony, he took his rattle and he went and he shook it, and he said in Indian, and I don't know how to say this in Indian, but he said the name goes through, which means that the name I was given was the name from my grandfather, and that I would carry that name my whole life, and it would go through and it would go on to one of the other people in my family after I was gone, and that's what he said, and that ceremony. That naming ceremony actually has been written, and so there's a number of different things. But that's how I got my name, and it was back. I'm 62 years old, and I'm still a lot younger than my elders. Although I'm rapidly becoming the elder in my family. I have one cousin who's older yet, but so I guess I'm going to have to admit to it at some point, But it's an interesting thing because we think of elders as in the non-Indian society, you become a senior citizen. And everybody bemoans and groans that and dyes their hair and does everything they can to not look old, and it just doesn't feel good about that. It feels, when they retire, they feel like they've been thrown away, and that, there's all these things, and there's this real big issue with that. Whereas in our Indian culture, elderhood is something we look forward to, because elders are respected, elders are asked for their advice, elders have a role in our culture, in our society, that's extremely important. And so looking forward to elderhood within the tribal community is actually something that you look forward to. It's not, you'd sort of like to be able to jump over the curve, and you'd like to be young in body as well, and still have that energy, but nevertheless, you know, we arrive with our aches and pains, but nevertheless, it's something to look forward to.
Now, you talked about the name and how you got it. What is the importance of, and you use the word Indian, I use Indian, some people think that's not PC, but what is the importance of having an Indian name?
You need to know who you are. You need that name, and that name places you. You know, you don't have a first and a last name in our traditional naming. You know, you are, you're from a place, and you place yourself also within a clan or a family, and then your name is the least important part of that, but it is still important, and it helps. It's part of that chain, and it helps you understand who you are, and it lets other people know who you are. And so, when we would travel from place to place, you know, prior to the coming of the white man, and being our community social structure has been really damaged in many ways, and it's still there to some extent. But in the old days, you'd go into a community and you'd go and you'd look for the doorposts, which were like little totems. And we get, like in our version, you think of totem poles, being those huge poles that you see that are from the West Coast. But here we did poles. We did these little like doorposts, and it would have your totem, your clan, carved on it. And everybody would do that, and you would go and find someone who was your clan at this community, and you'd go in and you'd be welcomed. They'd feed you and shelter you, and then when they came to your community, you'd do the same. And you might not be, quote, like today, you might not be from the same tribe. You might be, you know, in this case, Grand Traverse or Sault Ste. Marie or some other place around, but you're within the same culture, you would travel from place to place. So that clan really was an important part of placing you. You know, and
so you mentioned that it's the least important of things of your clan,
right.
Where you came from, your family. Is that why when I was taught how to introduce myself, I was taught that your name goes last?
Some people do that, some people don't, but whether you do or you do not do it last, it actually, it's not as important in establishing relationships with other people that you meet as them knowing your clan.
Now, you also said your name goes through. So, and I've known a lot of people that had multiple names. They changed their names. The name I have a name that goes through too. My Chikan, my name come from my grandfather, and hopefully we'll pass it down to someone else, or somebody else is going to have to pass it down because I'm keeping it till I'm gone. Do you have other names, or is there a process that you know of that people do that?
Some people carry 4 or 5 names. Some people carry one name at a time and it changes. Other people carry just one name. And so, for me, I carry a single name.
Okay.
Ettawageshik, Nunde. And, but I know others who've received names, more than one name in their lives. And it wasn't totally uncommon for us to have a name as a youth, and then sometime in our teen years, late teens perhaps, we would get a new name, and there'd be another name as an adult. But that's most of the people I know today receive an Indian name, and that's the name they carry, you know, their whole life.
Typically, just get one now.
Yeah, I mean that's really common. You know, I wanted to talk a little about some of the some thoughts and ideas that I had that you and I have talked about before, but that dealing with the idea of how do we pass on, or how do we really, I think, protect the future of our tribe.
I think that's what you're talking about is really the reason why I started this course, was your discussions that I've heard for many years about the things that every Adawa should know. And you often talked about a book that we would have, like the book that every American should know. There's a book out there that does that, and maybe there should be one like that for for us, and I don't know if I can do it justice, but my hope is that this course does a small part of what you and I have talked about, so I would like you to talk about that.
Well, I don't know, about 20 years ago at least now, I read a book called Cultural Literacy. And it's, I forget the author's name just offhand, it may come to me while I'm speaking here, but this book talked about a number of different things that were important, but that in essence it's a book on education, it's a book on reading was part of the question, part of the deal in reading, and that it was a time when some people were thinking that teaching reading was it's a skill that was separate somehow from the content of what you were reading. So that if you could teach people the skill of reading, I'm not sure what that is exactly, but that would be separate from this concept of the content. And years ago, many years before that, pretty much everybody who was in a certain grade level would read the Gettysburg Address. In fact, many people had to memorize it. And then they'd go on and they'd read something else. And so pretty much everybody in the country who had gone to school had studied the same few types of texts. And so they could, in letters to each other, they could allude to those without having to write the whole thing. They could just sort of, make a brief comment to it and communicate with each other quite well. And but there was the end result is that the author concluded that reading was a skill in which content was very important. It wasn't separate. So the content became important for someone to be literate in United States culture. They had to have certain content that would have come from different readings or different things, and that you need to know these things in order to read well. Because when you read, you've all talked to somebody or listened to somebody read who said, see, spot, run away with the ball. By the time you get to the end of that, you really don't remember the beginning of the sentence. You could read each word, but it's hard. You have to read it quickly. You have this short-term memory. You have to read quite fast. And you got to read concepts, especially when you get into complicated sentences with lots of phrases and other types of things. And to do that, you have to understand the content of what you're reading. And you have to be able to do it in fairly short bursts, and you've got to have a lot of reference material in your head, so to speak. And so the conclusion is that they came up with this list in this book, Cultural Literacy, that lists, at that point in time, on that day that he wrote it, this is the list of what he felt that every literate American ought to know. And it had things on it like 1776, the date, so everybody knows what that is, right? 1776. And then it had, 1941, okay, the beginning of World War II for the United States. And it had, 1066, the Battle of Hastings, okay. And it had a bunch of dates. And then it had words, and concepts, book titles, and just this long list of words and names and things and stuff. And if you had those things in your head, then what would happen is when you went to read, you'd be able to read much quicker and actually understand what you were reading. Your comprehension level goes way up. And so you didn't have to, Moby Dick was on there. Okay, so you didn't have to have read Moby Dick. You had to know that the book Moby Dick was about a whale, and you had to understand just a few concepts about it. So anyway, as you go through this long list of things, it became real interesting to me to study this. And while I was studying this, I said, there's Indian words on here like toboggan and tobacco and a bunch of other words that are from our Indian cultures that are part of this list, because our words have worked their way into the English language and worked their way into this list of what every American ought to know. Well, I think I like the concepts of this book. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's some controversy about it, like every idea. There's some people who think differently about that. But I got to thinking about this and carrying it further. What should every literate Odawa know? Well, every literate Odawa should know everything that's on the other list, plus a bunch of other things that would need to be part of our culture. And so there's things, so for instance, there's a certain number of words. You might not be able to have to speak our language, which is always a good idea anyway, but if you didn't speak the language, you at least need to know Miigwech and Ani, and you're going to know Nokomis, you're going to know a bunch of things that are fairly common things that we do. You're going to at least need to know that. But what other things are you going to need to know to be literate in Odawa culture? And just as an example, I see everybody's dutifully ready to take notes and has pencil and paper. I want you to write something. I want to ask you a series of questions. There's no quiz, there's no test, and nothing. This is just a self-evaluation on your part. But I'm going to ask you a series of questions.
Get a cupcake if you get them all right.
and it's not you're not writing an essay here. You're writing just a name and maybe a couple words about it. You're just a bit. Okay, the first question is this. Name 5 U.S. presidents and something about why they are remembered.
Don't be graphic with Clinton.
And this is not a big, long essay. I'm going to wait till I see pens start to get sitting down, and then I'll ask the next question. You know, and I was thinking of one of them could be as simple as George Washington and cherry tree. And there's this theory. But the point is that okay, I'm going to ask I guess about a third done, maybe half.
Good enough.
Okay. There's a second question is, give the names of 4 local geographical land or water sites. Landmarks, sites, places, just 4. The next question here is going to be, and I'm counting down, I went from 5 to 4 this time. List 3 historical events in Michigan history.
Michigan history?
Yeah. Or any history if you want.
I had a bunch of foreign students in a class one time, and one of my questions was about the ex-governors that I had listed in a spreadsheet. He said, that's not fair.
Well, the next question here is name 2 contemporary international leaders. Some people that are in the news, for instance, internationally. And the last question I'm going to ask you on this particular list is, what is your family name? That's pretty simple. Okay? Just what's your last name, basically. Okay. Most people are going to be able to go through this list pretty easily. and come up with most of those. Going to do this fairly well. But now, name 5 Odawa chiefs and something about why they are remembered. Okay.
Name
5 Odawa chiefs and something
It
about
is a college course.
Can you just put where they're from? Or do we have to-
Well, I don't know the names of the chiefs.
the names of them?
Yeah. Name 5 of them. And, you know, something about, I mean, they signed a treaty, they did this, they did that, they did something else, or, you know. But, and, you know, you can think about what this is going to, what this does for you, and that, but that, the next one, of course, is going to be the number 4 again. Give the Anishinaabe names for 4 local land or water sites, geographical sites. Give the Indian or Anishinaabe names for 4 local land or water.
That was probably easier than you think. Yeah, because half of them have Indian names already.
But they don't spell them the same.
No.
And,
It's a whole argument of spelling.
yeah, there's a, you know, when we go through these things, the next one is I'm going to ask you to list 3 historical events in Odawa history.
How many times?
3. And this is also a little easier than this is. There are maybe some very specific arcane types of knowledge, but there's also some pretty public knowledge of Odawa history. But just 3 events in Odawa history. And I see people still writing, but I'm going to ask you. The next question is, of course, dealing with 2. I'm going to ask you to name 2 contemporary international Native leaders. And that's one
Was that Anishinaabe?
international Native leaders, Anishinaabe leaders, or Dene leaders, or whatever, but international Native leaders.
Does it have to be political?
No?
She's not a movie star.
Well, if they're leaders,
Well, yeah.
okay. And the last question in this series is, what is your clan or totem? The last question is, what is your clan or totem? And
what?
clan or totem or totem. And now you can assess yourself how well you've done on this comparison. But the whole point of this is to compare. And for most people, they can name 5 presidents. And they can tell you something, you know, Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, you got a bunch of different things, pretty easy. Generally, we have these things in our heads, but very few people can name 5 Odawa chiefs. And if you're going back historically, it's very difficult for a lot of people, unless it's someone in your family tree that you might remember. But other than that, it's very difficult sometimes to do that. And most of our tribal population and most of the local population, other than tribal, they don't know the answer to these things, because this isn't just true about what our native culture, native people need to know. But the non-natives around us who interact with the tribe need to know and understand these same kind of things. I think of the example of Judge Fenlon, who served in the the Michigan Congress and on the bench and for years. And he grew up. His parents had a store where they sold groceries, and most of their customers were Indians. So they had to learn to speak Indian. So he learned to speak Indian fluently. And he understood our issues. He paid attention to that. He really understood these things throughout his life. He was non-native, but he knew a lot about our culture and a lot about the things that we did. He knew our language because of how he grew up. Well, I went to Big Boy here the other day, and I was paid my bill, and the clerk said, "Miigwech," I said, "Miigwech," and I walked out. I got about 20 steps outside the door and realized that she just spoke Indian to me. It's that kind of thing that we need to do in order to have our culture, our language, and our culture really survive. It's not only for us to know it. We can't treat it like it's somehow some sacred, secret knowledge. It's knowledge that other people need to know as well in order to have healthy interactions with our tribal community. And so, 5 chiefs, the Anishinaabe names, 3 historical events. These could be from our history. Doesn't stop at contact. It goes to be way beyond. So we consider history to be all of our stories and legends and all of the things that people have talked about and our what we pass down within our culture. And the historical events is the same thing. International Native leaders. Well, we have Jefferson Keel is the president of the National Congress of American Indians, for instance, which is an international. It's all full of tribal nations. That's what this thing is. And so an international relationship for a tribal government is Little Trappers, it's with Grand Trappers. That's an international, our international policy is how we deal with other nations. And here's these other nations all around us. People don't think of international, think France, okay, or Japan or something. Well, it is that, but it's also between our tribal nations. And so, when you have international leaders, you could very well be the chairman of another tribe or someone who's chairman of an intertribal group. Or it could be people who are working on international issues, such as the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. We had leaders from all over the Indian country who've spent years working on getting this declaration passed, and worked with other people all over. There's women who have been working on women's issues throughout all of the Americas, working on all of the slave trade and all the other things trying to stop that. We have all of these things going on. So the international leaders, you have to think, you all have heard of them, you know these people, and yet you don't necessarily think of them that way. And what is your plan or dotem? Well, every one of us, every one of us on earth has a mark or something that comes of their family. I was listening to some Italians talking the other day about the things that they have that were the marks of their families. It's the same kind of thing that we do. And I had someone come to me. I used to have a store, and I would sell my pottery out of the store. And I'm Indian. I got an Indian name on the store. People go out pottery. People walk in and they go, "Oh, what tribe are you from?" Well, after about 7 million times of somebody asking you that, you got a nice answer. Sometimes you just go, "Well, what tribe are you from?" And they go, "I'm not from a tribe. I'm from England or this or that." Well, of course they are. You read this. You look at the book of English. There's this book this book on the story of English, and it talks about how the English language came into being and stuff. And if you look at that, around England, there's parts of England where everybody's short and squat. Other places are all tall and lean. And other places, they clearly are tribal. They clearly have local, the local tribes still are, the genes are still there in these different places. And so, we all have that kind of ties to the earth. But the point of this exercise, and you look at your own answers and do it, is to help you understand, why do we need this class? And by physically doing this, you're going to really understand what it is that we need to have. We need to have more of our people understand these things, because we go to court. And as an elder, someday, you may be asked to testify on something in court. And they're going to say, where's your reservation? And if you go, oh, I live out on the res, and you're talking about tribal housing, and it's just this 80-acre parcel, they're going to say, oh, so that's where your reservation is. But if you actually know where the reservation is, which is, it's almost all of Emmett County and a part of Charlevoix County and some of the islands offshore, well, that's where the reservation boundary is. And all of the tribal lands are owned within that. You need to understand those kind of history. You need to have that thing, because it's important for us. It's important for us to know where our people lived. It's important for us to know where we're going. And so all of these different things that come together, the history, the language, this idea about trying to be literate within our culture. Literate literally means reading, but it also means able to converse. I mean, one of the biggest art forms and most well-practiced art forms for the Odawa people is oratory. And if you listen to true orators in the language, they can talk for hours. And they'll start down the road and they'll be talking about this, and then they'll sort of drift off on the side on this little thing and be talking about this, and they'll drift off on the side on that and be talking about that, and they'll talk about this other thing. And pretty soon they've got it, and they bring it right back around and they're on the main road again, and then they drift off this side. And over a space of 2 or 3 hours, there's this incredible textural experience that you have of listening to the way that oration is put together. And that's one of our art forms. It's one of the things that we did. And, so we all have that gift of gab. Some of us use it more than others. And some of us are more famous than others for it. But nevertheless, that's stuff that's important. And I wanted to share this journey that I had that got me to the point where I'm thinking about what we need to do in order to help expand on the understanding of our culture. And along the way, I had suggested that we needed to do projects and do things that would help us get to a broader understanding of our culture and history and have more people sort of on the same page. And along that way, we started doing videos at the tribe. And when we did a video first, for the hotel, when we opened the hotel, we did an Odawa Channel video. And it had some really nice history and stuff on it, but that got us sort of started on things. And we did the Journey to Sovereignty video, which gets the interviewed people and talked about the history of the relationship of the tribe and the federal government through the treaty time and all the stuff on the legislation that got passed. And that helped everybody see. That's available now for all time for people to see, and everybody in the tribe was sent one of those. Well, then we did the 4 Directions video, and that took us around the calendar year doing different things and showing a cycle of our life. And there's a bunch of other possibilities. Well, all of those things were then sent to all the tribal members. They were sent to local libraries. They were shown on public TV, and still are. They're, so it's not just the tribal folks. We showed them to all the law enforcement officers. We brought them together and showed them these videos, because they left understanding that we were a nation before they saw this, that really didn't quite get the fact that the tribe is a nation. And so when we went through these, those videos where we send that out to everybody, the idea of books and other things that are just critical. So that was, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, sort of have you understand a little, and I think I touched on the points we talked about before, Fred. But,
Well, you used the word culture quite a few times. What is our culture? What was it? What is it becoming? Is there a difference? Is it a fixed rock?
Well, Many years ago, I read a book by a professor at the University of Michigan named Leslie White, and the book is The Science of Culture. And in there, he talks about and explains it in such a way that culture is like a living, breathing thing, and it evolves and changes and mutates and grows and does all these things, and it surrounds us. And so, because it surrounds us and we learn so much out of it, we sometimes, you have to understand what's happening in order to truly think some things through. For instance, one of the chapters was the locus of mathematical reality. All of us know that math is something that's out there. We learn it, it exists, and therefore it's something that we think of it as the way we approach math. We think of that as being a universal truth. Well, it actually is only universal within our culture, because outside of our culture, different systems exist. There's different ways of thinking about things, and so when you do that, within your culture, you have all these different things surrounding you. So now, what about native culture? What about our culture? We think. Well, an example, we were using computers, and I had somebody say, "You can't use computers. Computers are not traditional. We never had them. We can't use them. They're not traditional, and it's just something we just can't do. We can't do that. And if you're going to truly be traditional, you can't do any of that stuff." Well, one of the elders told me this story. He said, "I see that computer. And you look at that computer, and you start sort of tearing it down and looking into the parts, getting into those pieces. You start getting into how it works. And what it's working with is electricity. And that electricity is the lightning, it's the thunders. It's one of our gifts from the Creator. And if that gift is just a way of working, it's just a box with some things in it that uses our traditional gifts. It's every bit as traditional as any other thing that we have. And you can, as there is in everything that you can do, you can abuse them, you can take things too far, you can take them not far enough, but nevertheless, this is something that we can use if we're careful and we know how to use it. We have to use our common sense and understanding how these things work.
So it's not sacrilege to use a chainsaw to cut off wood for a sweat lodge?
No. No.
We don't want to use a stone axe. One
of my elders tells me that we had common sense. We used common sense, and when we put up our lodge at our house there, we used scaffolding to get up high to get to the top. And someone said, "Oh, I don't know about that. Is that traditional?" And somebody else said, if our ancestors had scaffolding, then he used it. And as it is, we put 4 poles up by the fire. And in the old days, we would have lashed a platform to those 4 poles and then moved that up as we got moved so you could climb up and work on it. And then when you got done, you just take that platform down and you'd have your lodge built around it. But, since we had scaffolding and we could put it up in about a tenth the time it would take to lash all the poles in, we felt, well, that was acceptable. And so that's part of it. So the question is, what is culture? Culture is what we eat. Culture is what we think. Culture is how we interact with each other, what we call each other. Culture is, every one of us is making culture. We're making our traditions as we go. There's people who think that culture is only things that were somehow untouched by non-Indian folks, by the dominant culture, by other people, wherever they come from. That anything that we have that's somehow pure and untouched, that's our true culture. And so they're constantly trying to sort of go to the past to find the things for how they're going to live today. And it's important to understand your past. It's important to understand those things. But if you're constantly focused on the past while you're moving in the future, it means you're moving backwards. You're going to trip. You have to realize that you're moving forward. And so you want to bring the best of the past with you as you're moving into the future. And a real good example of this is there's a friend I have who was working at the National Museum of the National, what's it, the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And they had a collection of masks that had been carved by the Kwakiutl tribe from the West Coast. And these masks were, they'd been there for a long time, and they'd been in the storage, in the storage area of the museum. And this woman was working there, and she decided that she and one of her people she was working with, they decided they were going to put together an exhibit of these masks. And so what they did is they took a trip out to the Kwakiutl. And they had pictures, and they showed them the things, and they really wanted to do this right and talk with the tribe. Well, when they got there, the people of the tribe were talking about the masks as living beings. They were talking about how they were collected, and they'd been collected by someone in the 20s, and had like been away from the people for all this time, and how the masks hadn't been fed properly or in ceremony, and all the things that they needed. Well, what they did is they made arrangements to bring a number of the elders and some of the young people to help them to come to New York City, to the Big Apple, to come there and to be there and go through these. So they came and they properly fed the masks. They took care of them. They sort of reacquainted themselves with these masks, and they spent about a month there going through this and helping them get together with the exhibit, and the museum and the people made a connection where they will. There's a continual connection with this exhibit, with this collection now. Well, after this was all done, my friend and her partner in the exhibit, they went out to visit the tribe. And at the tribe, they had this, they did this, they were doing one of the big ceremonies, the potlatch ceremonies. And they have songs, and they have doing all the traditions and all the things in there. But then they asked these folks to come up. And they came up front, and this tribe is famous for it, what they call button blankets. Where they use these black cloth, and they sew these red buttons on it to make different patterns. There's floral patterns, all kinds of different things. Well, they made these two blankets and presented them to these two folks. And on them was a great big red apple. And they said, "We don't know why you named your city after an apple, but we made these blankets." And what they did is they had this, these red apple blankets. And she told me this story down in Grand Rapids a number of years ago, and she said that, after they did that, they then sang the Red Apple Blanket song. And they had written a song for this event, and it told the story of all this stuff that had happened that I just told you in the song. And they said it's going to be part of our ceremonies from now on. Well, that's an interesting story, but think about what that means, because these people who were doing this were not only willing to look to the past and bring the best of the past forward, but they realized that they were living in the present, and they were making traditions for the future. As you live, you're making traditions. So this is all what is culture. Culture evolves. This was an evolution or a state. It wasn't just all static. It was something that moved ahead. And so, if you study Latin as a language, for instance, you can learn every single thing there is to know about Latin. You can learn every single specific thing, because Latin is a dead language. It's not growing. And what happens is that you can quantifiably learn everything there is. But you can't do that with the Anishinaabe language. And the reason you can is because you have things like Gigado Biapkons. Gigado is speak Biapkons, little wires. We never had a telephone, but we have a Gigado Biapkons. Okay? And you have, other types of things. There's, the famous word of Shimna Basmin Shiga Bitoji Squagadagan, with apple pie. Apples cooked together in a sweet sauce between crusts in a pan. It's a non-Indian concept, but you have all this long list of words, to do that. And so what you do is, our language is constantly growing and evolving. And so it's not a dead language. Well, our culture, language is a reflection of our culture. And our culture is reflected in the language. And we have, but it's also reflected in the powwow, in the dance. It's reflected in the ceremonies that we do. It's reflected in the multiple ways that our people approach the Creator, through Meday Lodge or Wabano Lodge or independent lodges, or the Native American Church, through the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church, through all these different ways that people do. We have Muslims, we have atheists and agnostics, and everything you can imagine are all part of our the native culture, our native of the tribe, and all of those things are there. So culture also is not just one thing. It's a little different, it's got different elements to it. And someone asked me, well, is Christianity traditional for Native people? Well, there are some of our families that have been Christians since the 1600s. It's quite a long time. Okay? What is traditional? And there's others that have never been Christian ever in their lives. They follow traditional, somewhat variety of the traditional teachings. So, sort of long-winded answer about culture, but I tried to bring a lot of the different things in.
Well, what happens when our culture clashes with another one, like capitalism? I often think of a large part of our culture was tribalism, and may still be, and maybe tribalism is just changing. But in the face of death of cultures all around the world due to capitalism, what happens to us? How do we evolve with tribalism, or do we become something else? Do we lose tribalism?
Well, it's a lot of different elements to that question, but we, as Odawa, were very much involved in commerce. We had trade routes. We went down the Gulf. We went to the Rockies. We went out east. We got mica from the Smokies. And, we had seashells from the Atlantic. And, we had trade routes, and we would take long trips that might last more than a year in trading and different things. And we did these things. And so we had the idea of commerce of and by itself is not something that is, when people think of capitalism, they think of it in that somehow the opposite of that is not doing any business at all. And that's not true, because people need goods to survive in one way or another, and how you trade them, how you get them, what you do with them is we've always been good at those things. We've always worked at those, and some people were better than others. And because of that, most of our people were at least trilingual, if not quadrilingual, or more, understanding, knowing other native languages, knowing Native American Sign, or knowing English, French, or Spanish, and some of us knew all of those. So it was imperative that we speak at least two languages, and more often more than that, in order to survive in the world that we were in. And so, that is part of that idea about understanding things. So, do we lose tribalism? I'm doing a lot of international work with indigenous peoples from other continents. I went to India in January to the first roundtable for the World Parliament of Indigenous Peoples. And while there was a discussion about the creation of this World Parliament. And there were people, indigenous peoples represented from all across North America. I was representing the woodlands. We had someone from the Great Plains of Lakota. We had folks from the east. There was a Mohawk. And we had people from Laguna Pueblo, and then further south We had Native Hawaiians and Native Alaskans. We had Maori from New Zealand, several different places in New Zealand. We had the Aborigines from Australia, the Sami from Norway, that are the reindeer herders that live up in Norway and Sweden and Finland and Russia. There's a whole section there. These people from all over were part of this, and we didn't represent all of the indigenous peoples of the earth, but we represented a big cross-section. And the idea was trying to put things together, and how do we express those elements of our traditional cultures that are, respect, for instance, respect for the land, respect for the environment. The concept that we're not the center of the universe, rather we're, as individuals, we're participants or part of that universe. And these are some of the gifts that we have, and because of that, you make different choices when you're doing your city planning. You make different choices when you're choosing whether or not to do nuclear power, for instance, where you create poisons that have to be guarded for thousands of years. Somebody told me the Great Pyramid, if it had been built to store nuclear waste, would only be a third of the way through the necessary life right now. Only a third of the way. And no human civilization has ever maintained order that long, ever. It's always been chaos in between. And yet we're producing it day by day, right now, with nowhere to put it. And we're storing it out on a big pad there at Big Rock, even though the plant's gone. There's a pad out there of concrete with concertina wire around it and guards and lights and sensors and all this stuff and all these casks of nuclear waste in there. And it would have to be there longer than the Great Pyramid's been standing in order to just naturally become safe. Well, it's things like that when you're talking about the ideas of commerce. When you think in terms of many generations, you think about, the concept of the values of indigenous people, respecting the woods. I read a concept just yesterday about, what was it, nature deficit disorder. Okay. Those kind of concepts are things that we need to think about. You look at the amount of energy that we use. Is extravagant, and yet, I went to India and I was in this little tiny remote village of some of the poorest people, and there were still some wires that ran there. They got power about 4 hours a day. They never knew exactly which 4 hours. They had batteries and storage things. But a third of the kids there had cell phones with cameras on. And they were taking our pictures as we're coming through. You have this, it's not that we can't use technology. It's not that we can't be doing, we have to be smart about the way we do that. And how do we make those choices? Because those choices, the values of indigenous people, the values of tribalism, those central values, are ones that are part of that are part of the background for every human being, all cultures. Some cultures are closer to those values than others. And, some people have almost totally lost their roots to those values within their cultures. And as our tribe is much closer to them, we have them, we practice them, okay? And that we need to continue and to grow those things, and to have those, I'm reading a book right now called Native Science by Jeffrey Cayete, Cayete. And it's contrasting the Western scientific view with Native scientific views, and how those things work. And for instance, in Native worldview, in our Odawa worldview, the idea of science and religion, for instance, not separable. They're all combined. And at one point that was true in Western science. And then science and religion sort of parted ways. And you either believed in the church or you were a scientist. And it was really hard to be both. And some people have tried in different ways. But as science has gotten further and further out, and they've gotten all these things, they've actually they've proven that things could be in more than one place at once. Scientifically, they can prove it. Something can be in two places at once. But our culture has yet to figure out, we have not been able to deal with that yet. There's other things that we've been able to do. The views of the concepts that are being arrived at mathematically are, well, as an example, I heard on National Public Radio that there was an award that was presented for mathematics, and I think it's from the King of Norway, if I'm not mistaken, and it's comparable to Nobel Peace Prize or something like that, but it's a very prestigious award in the mathematics world. And I don't know an awful lot about this, but I'm paraphrasing what I've heard on the radio. But the guy who won it this year won it for his work on 7-dimensional spheres. 7-dimensional spheres. Not 2 or 3 or 4. 7. How many of you have seen a 7th dimension? Okay, you think about that a little. Well, this guy sees it. He understands that. I mean, he's done this work on this. Well, that's our own mathematics. If you know, I mean, it's an outgrowth of Western science mathematics. If you look at that, but native cultures have understood these things forever. We understand that.
We use 7 dimensions.
Yeah. And the point is that, and so we understand those kinds of things, and so, for us, those, there are things that we understand that our worldview includes things that are not in the worldview of non-natives, non-indigenous peoples often. And this is the stuff that we're faced with. So what does that mean? It means that indigenous people throughout the earth, we all have knowledge that is important. And each of us are not protectors of it, but we're the stewards of that knowledge. Certain medicinal knowledge, certain knowledge of the way of thinking or of moving things and doing things. And that knowledge is important for the well-being and survival of humankind. But it's been marginalized as insignificant by, and this is where we'll get back to capitalism, by this concept of everything has to be have a dollar value on it, and if it's going to cost you too much, you just don't do it that way. Even if it's the right way to do it, you do it the wrong way, even though you know it's wrong, because it's the only way you can afford to do it. Well, that isn't the right way for human beings to do things, because we're going to destroy ourselves that way. We have to follow these traditional teachings and understand them, so that the ethics and the value systems that we have that are part of our traditional teachings are essential for the survival of human beings. And we need to strengthen that, understand that, and we need to also come to understand that those things that we learned from our grandmothers, those ways of speaking, or those ways of raising children, or those ways of dealing with medicines and plants, that isn't some tiny little thing over here that's just sitting out there that is of significance. Everybody who ever learned anything from an elder should take a deep breath and be really proud of that fact. Go ahead, take a deep breath. Every one of you did. Okay? And those things that we have as people, we have to value the things that are our gifts, and then we have to be able to share those gifts. I used to have this little saying on the wall over my desk at home, 20 years it said it, just pinned to the wall. And it said, even if it's your own song, you still have to learn how to sing it. Well, you know, we have to learn how to sing that song. We have to learn what the words are. We gotta come together with these things. We have to bring those little pieces out. And part of the thing that's happened in our culture is as so many of our bits of knowledge have sort of drifted and been separated from each other into smaller little pockets of things, and we have little bits of knowledge, a song, for instance. We often treat that almost like it's sacred knowledge, when actually it's just a kid's song. Okay? Or, you know, there are sacred knowledge, but there's things that we need to be able to share with each other, and we need to be able to be proud of our culture. And we need to share this with all of the people around us with whom we deal. You know, and that we need to be able to be strong enough in this. And so, we have things that are particularly our culture. We need to work to protect it, and we need to work to try to. There were in our history. And my father was a county chief for an organization called the Michigan Indian Defense Association. And it was formed at a time when this pan-Indianism was happening all across the country, and all these different things were going on. And we really wanted to try to help protect Michigan Indian culture. And when you joined this organization, you signed this little pledge about what you would do, you know, and how you would do these things. And it was to help guide and protect our language, protect our culture, and not keep it away from people, but to help expand upon it, let it grow and thrive, and try to avoid some of these outside influences. And as you, this was a fairly large organization. It was one of the precursor to the Northern Michigan Ottawa Association, of which most of the federally recognized tribes in the state have sprung out of. Many of the tribes in the state have sprung out of the different units of the Northern Michigan Ottawa Association. But this is part of our history, and it's part of the history that you ought to know. And there's these are things we've had elders who have talked about these things and worked on them and tried to teach others and to make sure that we could pass our language on, pass our culture on, pass our history, and all these, we could pass it on for coming generations.
Well, let's take a commercial break and come back in a little while. If anybody would like a cupcake, I've got some up here. And over in so the pretty nice shot. They probably didn't record the whole. One time I did an interview with a student. I went down and interviewed one of my students after she graduated, and I was with her for an hour and a half, and I got home and I listened to the things. No sound.
Oh.
That's why I always wish Frank had one of those little mics on.
Yeah, I'm working on that stuff. After a while, it's too much. So the cupcakes were the segue into the second half. You like them?
Oh, good.
Yeah. Indian-owned company.
I know, they are just magnificent. That's the word.
And actually, it was neat. Maria, and she's really good at that. She got a scholarship from the tribe to go to baking school, or not baking school, actually chef school. Yeah. She'll get mad at me if she hears me say that. But she went to a chef school out in New England, and that's where she met her husband, who works at the Sage. And he's our chef up there. And that guy's phenomenal too, huh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So those of us who like to eat, there's a bunch of us.
Oh, yeah.
But Maria's company is 100% Indian owned, and it was formed by laws under our tribe. And she is one of the first, I don't know how many actual, if there were any, but she's an S corporation under the tax laws from, and there's not even spots on the forms for this. It's difficult to do, but her company was the first to be an S corporation for tax purposes with the IRS. And it's neat. She's a woman. And I've always said that the women in our tribe are the ones that have carried us through. And so it's neat to have her do that. That's where the cupcakes came from. But the segue is, we talked a lot about where we've been and how we're changing and that. And, what we want to know now is where we're at and maybe where you think we're going. I think it's important to, like you said earlier, know where you came from, to know where you're going. Hopefully, like the turtle, we're going the direction we're facing, but we sometimes we don't know where we're going, and some people do. So if you could take a little time on those two subjects, maybe where we're at and hopefully where we're going.
Well, I think the first thing that I think about, and it's something I've said to a lot of people over the years, but that the government isn't the tribe. And too often tribal citizens, they want the tribal government to do everything. They want the government to provide jobs, they want the government to provide all the programs, buy the meat for the feasts, to basically do everything and pay for it all. And in so doing, they also get really upset if the government has an opinion about how something ought to be done. They want the feasts, or who ought to be invited to the powwow or not, all of these different kinds of things. And we have existed as a tribal community, as a tribe, forever. And we've existed and we've functioned. We were able to do our own policing. We had our own governance systems. We had our own education process that was every bit as important and every bit as detailed as what we consider as an education process today. But we didn't have classes in schools and degrees. People learned what they needed to be real human beings. And there's an interesting story about that I read in a book called Forgotten Founders about the United States Constitution. And in there they recount this story of several of it was in Virginia, and there was a number of the native people were at a council, and the local people, the local non-Indians there, they made an offer to the Indians to educate. They said, we'll take 12 of your young men and we'll bring them in and we'll educate them in our schools. And as is typical, it's really not polite to instantaneously answer people on things, because that means you didn't think about what they said. So what happens is that the council nodded and said, all right, we'll think about this. And so they thought about it overnight. The next day they said, well, we thank you so much for this offer. We think it was a great offer. And we think that it was, we really appreciate that, and we know that you meant it with a good heart and all of these other things. But what we found is when one of our people go through your education process, when they return to the people, they're useless. They're not full human beings. They really don't know how to be a human being. But we would be glad to take 12 of your children and bring them and train them in our ways and make human beings out of them. Well, what does that mean? I mean, does it mean that we shouldn't take college classes? It doesn't mean that. Does it mean that we shouldn't seek degrees and things? No. But it does mean that we have to maintain our worldview while we're doing it. We have to think about how that fits into our worldview. And to do that, we have to try to understand what our worldview is. Most people don't go around and say, well, my worldview is this. Most people don't have that. If you have, what's your personal philosophy? Has anybody ever asked you that? Have you ever thought about what your personal philosophy is? What is it? Well, I thought about mine. a lot of people. I had to think about this for a long time. And I came to understand that my personal philosophy is to strengthen goodness and discourage evil. Not defeat it, because you can never do that. But to strengthen goodness and discourage evil. And that's my personal philosophy. And I try to do that every day in my life. And in the things I do, the things I choose to do, the things I choose to read, the education I do, agreeing to come to this class was part of that process, strengthening goodness. Discouraging that evil and evil in this case is not knowing in that case. It's allowing bad things to happen because we don't share the knowledge we have. And so part of that personal philosophy is why I'm here. Well, if somebody asks you, what is your personal philosophy? Have you thought it through? Do you understand it in a way that you can verbalize it? Okay? And that's something that's important for us. And it's something that as Native people, we have that. We have those teachings. We have teachings that we learn in the lodge. We have teachings we learn in the stories that we get and in our interactions with people. But these are all things that are part of our understanding our worldview. And so when we think about where are we? Well, we are citizens of our tribal nation. We're citizens of Michigan. We're citizens of the United States, or Canada as it may be. And we're citizens of the world, but there isn't a world citizenship that you have necessarily, as in terms of the nation state. But when you think of those different things, our world is divided into nation states who have formed the United Nations. Tomorrow I'm testifying before the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And the thing I have to do is they wanted me to talk about federal recognition and climate change. And I got 5 minutes. Fortunately, I get to turn in written testimony, and I've conferred with people all over the country about what things ought to be in this. And I've talked to people from the West Coast and the East Coast and the South and the North, and I've tried to get input on these things because it's, even though I'm there, it isn't just me that's there. I'm representing lots of other people, and so I wanted to be sure that I got input from people to try to guide the things that we could say. So I've got some text in there. But where are we? We're citizens of the planet. We're part of the universe. We're participants in life. Now, what does that mean? It means that you can sort of get your head out of there and be out in these things, and then you can go down the road and drive a little too fast, and then you got to deal with the policeman who's going to give you a ticket. Okay, and so there's different levels of interaction that you constantly have to be, and you can't just sort of drift away and be out there and just never. You've got to interact. You're going to have to eat. If you don't eat, you're going to die. You're going to have to drink water. You're going to have some money to figure out how you're going to have your shelter and your transportation and all those things. All this stuff we have to figure out how we're going to do all of these things. But we also have to try to figure out how do we do them and maintain a worldview that is that's healthy for our planet. And Native peoples have a very strong historical and cultural background and a worldview that, when you live it, is healthier for each other and for the planet. And when you sort of drift away from it and you get into some of the other things, some of those things seem fine on the surface. I mentioned nuclear power again. Nuclear power was a great thing. People were doing all these great things, and all of a sudden we had that tsunami in Japan. And now people are rethinking. There's a part of Japan that's not going to be livable for generations. They found parts of the fuel rods, a mile away after that explosion? They didn't tell us about that until just last week. Okay? Yeah. I mean, there's things that there's just this stuff that's happening. And, you know, I mean, there's these things that we have to do. So what do we do? What's our world? How is our worldview going to affect how we do things? Like, for instance, a really simple part, you know, I spend a lot of time working on water issues. And water, turn the water off when you brush your teeth. If everybody did that, how much less water would run down the drain? A lot. If you got a well, your own well, you're draining less of your own groundwater out. If you're using municipal water, there's less water to process through the sewage plant, and there's less water that they have to pump out of the ground. And so if everybody does that, it conserves a lot of groundwater. Where are we today? We have a tribal government, but it isn't the tribe. It serves the tribe. And so what does it do? It passes laws that allows our citizens to form corporations. That's a good job of government. That's something government should do. Okay? I maintain government should do that, but I don't think government should buy the meat for the feast. And the reason, and I got that story, and it's a story that I've told to people all over the continent here about it, because it's indicative of the kind of things that happen when government gets into places it shouldn't be. And one of these is in this case, you know, we had this dinner, the Three Kings dinner, that has been going on for forever. It's a long-standing dinner. Prior to being called the Three Kings dinner, we had a midwinter feast. And this dinner, what we did with it is that people who put it on, it was a bit of a burden to put it on. There was a lot of work involved in it. And people, you know, they said, well, we've got some money now with the casino, and we think that the tribal government should give us the money for the meat. And I voted against it and argued against it, because I said, I don't think we should be doing that. And people said, well, it's our money. We should be able to do that. And I got outvoted at council, because council voted and said, all right, I'm going to do this. Okay? And so we started buying the meat for the feast. And pretty soon, we were not just buying the meat for the feast, but now we were providing a little bit more money for things. And not only did we provide the place where the dinner was held, but then we started providing enough money that the last couple of years, the dinner was catered by the casino. Instead of individual people bringing food for the dinner like we'd always done, instead it got catered. And then one year, there's food for 150 people. It's all there, waiting for people to come. And we had a snow day, and nobody worked at the tribal center that day. And we had 5 people came to dinner. And people said, oh, nobody wants their traditions anymore. We should just stop this. Nobody was supporting it. We should just give it up. Well, what happened is, for the next year, it was 6 days before the feast, and we weren't, you know, nobody had done anything to have this feast. So we had this big discussion at the elders' luncheon. I think it was on Thursday. The dinner had to be on Saturday. Okay, so it's Thursday, and we had this thing. And if you know the elders' luncheon, by 1 o'clock, the place is mostly empty. Okay, well, we went till 2:30 with a full room, with people staying there talking about this issue, talking about what we should be doing, how we should be doing it, and whether or not whether we should rename it, whether we should not rename it, whether we should stop doing it, whether we should do it again. And what came out of that meeting was that we would do it as a potluck. And if the plates, the spoons, the silverware, the napkins, everything was potluck. And we had people sign up so that we could do this. And so we did the potluck dinner for this feast. We had 79 people. Everybody was happy. We had this big crowd, and you know what? It's been almost that same size crowd, up or down a little, sometimes more, sometimes less, ever since. And government is not paying a dime for this dinner. Now, government built the building, we're having it, but that's it. And provided that so the community has it. But the government's not doing that at all. It's the community that's doing that. And that is how we keep something alive. So what do we have at present? Well, we have to deal with a government that is, and this is true not only at the tribal level, you look at the U.S. government. Right now we're in all of this chaos with people trying to decide, you know, has the federal government been buying the meat for the feast for years for things that they shouldn't be doing? And, you know, some of the conservatives who've gotten in believe that we've been spending way too much money on things we shouldn't be spending on, and they want to get rid of it. And other people think, no, we should. So this debate is happening at the tribal level, it happens at the county level, it happens at the state, it happens at all, pretty much every government has to face these kind of issues. But there's things that government's very good at, and there's things that they aren't. Well, so where are we? We're in the beginning years of a constitutional government that, we have a little constitution, I carry one around with me all the time, because we have a good constitution, I believe. And this constitution is something that has protections in it that protects us from the overaccumulation of power in any one branch of government, which is, I think, a good thing. And we have, and it lays out a process. It's not perfect. It's got problems with it. But the point is that's true for any governing document. Well, we have this. But this isn't the tribe. This is a reflection of the tribal community and guidance towards having, towards what the government does. But of the people sitting in this room, most of you probably didn't attend the last county commission meeting. And I dare say you probably didn't attend a county commission meeting in the last year. And I would say the majority of you have never attended a county commission meeting. Okay? And a city council meeting? Maybe, but probably the same thing there. And I don't think there's there might be a couple in here who sat down at the state legislature and watched the state legislature work and been down there. But we don't interact with that level of government very much. And yet somehow we think that our tribal government we expect it to be way more interactive, and we expect it to do so many things for us. But we live fine with working with these other governments, and somehow the tribal government, if you think about it, most of our tribal citizens have never been to a council meeting, have rarely read the minutes of a council meeting, if ever, and have opinions on things. But the majority are not registered voters. And so the tribe is this very large entity that interacts with its government when it needs it, when it wants it. But the tribe, with its various communities and cultures, is an entity that is moving into the future. And all of us can help guide that. So we know where we are, but how do we guide that? We want to make sure we have the history that we've talked about. We want to make sure that we have have our language. The efforts to save the language, part of that is tribal. But that isn't just tribal. It's the Odawa Institute, which is a nonprofit corporation separate from the tribe, but made up largely of tribal members. I take this as an example of things. If you go to the dump, what I used to be is known as the dump, Harbor Springs. We'd go there and we'd dump our stuff, and then we'd stay up there and we'd watch the bears down around the bottom, rummaging around. And I'd seen watching the bears. We'd go up there, shoot 22s. First time I shot a gun was up there. I was shooting rats down in the dump, And they all said, "Oh, it's a great idea." They sent us out there to shoot as many rats as we could shoot, And they ain't been buying a bit. The city police, the kids are out there shooting 22s. It's fine, no problem. Get rid of rats. Okay? Well, the thing is that this dump. So you want to find the dump today? You can't find the dump. But what you can find is Kiwanis Park. So you drive down Lake Street, you see this little sign, Kiwanis Park. You drive up that in Harbor Springs, top of the hill, and there's a sliding hill. There's, they got all that little pavilion. You can rent it, do picnics, and family reunions and stuff, and have winter sports up there and things. And it's Kiwanis Park. It's not Harbor Springs Park. It's Kiwanis Park. The Kiwanis, as a service group, sold hot dogs and raised money and did fundraisers and did all kinds of things and used some of their money to convert this into a park. So it's not the government. The government provided a place, but a service group within the community actually did the work. Many of you have been to fires when someone dies. We have 4-day fires for funerals. And often you've seen one of the firekeepers there who isn't a member of the family. Well, it's a group of men who have formed a group called the Firekeepers Association. It's not incorporated, although we're talking about that. It's the possibility of it under tribal law. But and it's an organization that just got together because some people needed help with fires. They either didn't know how to light it, or they didn't know who to light it, or they didn't know the protocols of keeping it, or they just didn't have enough people to actually watch a fire 24 hours a day for 4 days. So what happened is this group formed to do that. Well, that's a service group within our tribal community. We need to have a lot of those kind of things going on. And that's who the tribe is. That isn't a governmental function. That's a community function. It's a part of our tribal nation function. And that's done by the citizens. And so those kind of things are the things that really will help us. And actually, we already have all of those things. It's just we don't recognize it. We don't think about it. And so, to me, we're gaining strength, not only here, but other places in Indian country, all over North America, where people are doing these kind of things and working towards strengthening their tribal communities. There's different religious societies that are in some cases, in some places, the governments are, the spiritual leaders are actually part of the government and are actually within that structure. In other places, they're not. But these medicine societies and spiritual societies have roles in the community and do things to help out. I was sitting with some tribal leaders about 12 years ago, and one of them got a phone call. They said, "Oh, somebody's house burned down because we're going to build them a house." And I'm thinking, the government's going to go out and build this house. Well, every time the government builds a house for one person, there's other tribal members who says, "What about me? How come you're building a house for them?" Okay. But you could, like what the Amish and some of the other folks have done, it's formed collectives of people. If somebody's house burns down, they just all show up and build them a house. And they try to get they have things that they collect and store, so they have building materials on hand, and they're ready when they need it. Well, we need to have those same kind of things happen within Indian country, for those of us who have those skills and things that can actually assist with these things. And instead of relying on the government to do these things for us, and that I think our future is in the strength of our community. It's the strength of our history. It's the strength of our knowledge. And we are laying that groundwork. And we're laying the groundwork of being able to work together. We're laying that groundwork of what the government should be doing, like passing the law to make corporations so that we can have an organizational structure to do these things, helping to build physical places so that we can actually have meetings and gatherings. There's programs for which the government, there's things that the government does that it has to do, and it needs lots of money. And having an operation like the casino generates that money when we don't have a tax base. It's important to do those kind of things. But that of and by itself shouldn't be the end-all and be-all of what our existence is. It needs to be these other things. And so, to me, when we look in our history, and you'll see examples of this in the history as you read the various books that you'll be looking at, you're going to find many people who took on projects that were in great difficulty. There was a lot of difficulty involved in them. And some of them actually felt that they failed in their attempts to work. One of them was Ettawageshik, or Margaret Lloyd, Andrew Blackbird's sister, who went to Washington, D.C. And she went there because our soldiers who had fought in the Civil War had survived, the ones who came home. When they came home, they found that the farms that they had, or their land and houses that they had oftentimes been, when they left, somebody went and reported that this house was abandoned. And they put a notice in the thing, and a judge held a hearing on it after a certain number of days, and there was nobody there to speak to the house, and so they awarded the house to the person who claimed it. And so what happened, basically, we had citizens who were off at war, and of course they were citizens of our nation, they weren't yet citizens of the United States, but that they lost their land, their houses, in doing that. Well, Margaret Boyd was married to the nephew of the president, and she decided that she would try to take advantage of that. And so this Indian woman who had all these little quill boxes and stuff, she packed up her trunk, and she took those quill boxes, and she sold them to buy her fare on the train and to buy her food. She got herself all the way to Washington, and she was going to speak to the president because she knew that he would take care of this problem once he knew about it. He must just not know about it. So she managed to get there. She even got in the same room with the president, but she was never able to speak to him about this issue. And she came home, and she ran out of quill boxes, and she was destitute, and she was brokenhearted because she wasn't able to solve the problem. And when she got back, she wrote a letter about how devastating it was to see the faces of the people in the community who were so happy to see her coming home. But she knew that she couldn't tell them what they wanted to know, that she couldn't tell them that she'd solved this problem. And so she got home, she wrote a letter. She wrote it down, and she wrote that letter, and she wrote it to the government. Well, she always felt that she had failed somehow. So what we did when we were working on the reaffirmation bill, and we were preparing testimony for the Senate committee and the House committee when we were going to the hearings for that bill, one of the things that we had done is we had found that letter in the archives. Our researchers had found that. And I used that letter in my testimony. I was able to actually hold up a copy of that letter while I was before the committee in testimony. And I told the story of Margaret Boyd, Ettawageshik, and what she had done. And that was part of the evidence that helped us get our bill passed. So she didn't fail. It just took a long time to get that. And she was part of that. Many, many other people. I tell people, I was at the signing ceremony in the Oval Office with the president when that bill was signed. And I was the only Little Traverse tribal member there. And yet, I felt that all of our ancestors were there with me. And I was there representing all of the tribal citizens and our descendants, everyone. And the room was full at the signing of that. And all of those people, it was a cumulative effect of all the work that everybody had done. So even if you feel you do what's right, even if you think that it's impossible, even if you think that nobody's going to notice it, or that it might even fail, but if you do that thing that's right, what happens is, in the long run, it builds to where it ends. And that's what we do. And we have one bureaucrat who said, "This is going to happen over my dead body." So I said, "Okay, we'll wait." It's been 120 years, you didn't look too happy, another 5 years, maybe it is. But the point is that you try to do these things that work towards us. So you ask where are we? Well, we today have a better educated population than we've had in a long time. In terms of the non-Indian education and degrees. And at the same time, the schools where they've been getting these degrees have had increasingly more interaction with and understanding with native worldviews. So that they, like for instance, at Michigan State, you graduate with a law degree at Michigan State as a native. There's a whole Native American institute that's there on campus. There's the Native American section of the law school, where you focus on these things and you understand these worldviews, and in such a way that you are these people who are coming back to the tribes now are coming back in such a way that they're able to better fight these fights, and to meet the demands that we need to help protect not just the political things, the reservations and the lands, and to try to do all of those things, but also to protect our cultural way of life, to find ways to make room for things. You know, I think one of the battles that I fought and feel good about was just in our personnel policies of the tribe. I staunchly fought for 4 traditional days to be as days that you could get in the personnel policies, so that it would make it less likely that you'd have to choose between working and being an Indian. If somebody died and you had a 4-day fire and you were doing it in a family, you had a way to do that. Or you could take 2 days in a weekend and do this a couple times a year, or if there were things that you could do. And this was important because it's that mixing of worldviews to try to help you. So you try to find ways to make sure that our government, and to make sure that our business, the business opportunities, to make sure that our opportunity for education, and that education is not just in the classroom, but it's also, we've built a lodge on our property, and we have ceremonies there, and we talk about different things, and that's education. We're talking about our history, our culture, and these things. But at the same time, there are other lodges that are happening all around. There's other gatherings, there's other types of things. These things are growing, and what government is good at doing is helping to provide places that those kind of things can happen. There's a small grant program that Wasan, Renee Dillard, has used she gets a grant, and then she's taught baskets to anybody in the community who want to come. She's had basket workshops and use tribal facilities as a place to do it, but at the same time she had enough money to help make this thing happen, and she could do it for people essentially for free. So she's helping to teach the actual physical things of making the baskets, and part of that culture, some of the language that goes along with it. And there's a certain rhythm to life that happens as you're doing our traditional arts and crafts. I think of my wife right now who's tying a roach together, and there's a pattern to that, there's a rhythm to the way that she's got to work on that, and it's a very tedious and time-consuming process. But on the other hand, it's something that you can see. These are things that we do. I do traditional pottery, and there's a lot of. It takes a long time to work on these things. Beadwork. I know other people here do beadwork, and the amount of time it takes to focus on that beadwork or quill work or any of our traditional arts, including oratory. Each one of us needs to prepare for the time that we're asked to speak for something. What does it mean? If somebody asks you to say a prayer at a meeting, to say grace, I was taught that in our traditional way, what we do is we prepare ourselves so that when asked, we can do so. It doesn't mean that we step to the front and do it all the time. It just means we're ready. As a traditional man, I was taught that I needed to understand the ways of the pipe and the drum, and be willing and able to care for these and tend to them, and when asked, use them. And so those are things that I've been taught. And there's a lot of different things that we do. So this is part of where we are right now, and you can start to see where we're going. Things that it sort of takes us start down that road. We don't know for sure where we're going to be. But,
well, thank you, Frank. Does anybody have any other questions?
What committee? What committee is he testifying?
Oh, what committee are you
the Senate
testifying?
Committee on Indian Affairs. It's at 2:15 in the afternoon. It's going to be it'll be live stream. I'm one of a panel. I'm one of, I think, 3 panels of people. So that we each have about 5 minutes, and then we get to put in written testimony, and then there'll be questions and answers. So.
Is it on C-SPAN?
No, it's on the web. If you go to the committee website, the Senate committee website, there'll be a live broadcast on the web. The C-SPAN, I don't think C-SPAN would cover this particular hearing, but
I've watched those before.
and then very likely for at least a few days following, Indians.com, Indians spelled with a Z.com, has a list of headlines, and they usually have a window right there, and they have a video in that window, and they've had various hearings of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs over the last about a year now. They've had different hearings that are in there that you can listen to. And I listened to the one on mascots and stereotypes. It was nearly 2 hours long of discussion. It was a very good hearing. And those are all archived. You can find them in our archives and watch them if you want. So I suspect that will be there.
I brought a book here,
Yeah.
2 of them, actually, 4.
Yeah. Well, the first one is one I think that everybody's familiar with.
Required reading. Read the
History
whole
of the,
thing.
history of the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians of Michigan. An interesting thing, if you're going to read this, try this when you read it. Every time he gives the name of somebody, write down that name. And if he gives you that they lived before this person or after this other one, or he gives the year or what was happening, write that down. And then collect those and put them in a timeline. And he doesn't do it. It's not a straight, simple timeline. It's all over the book. There's a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit some other place. And when you do that, you'll find that this goes back at least into the 1300s. Okay, at least there, and way before contact. Yes.
You know, I wanted to say that is my great uncle. And I'm really amazed about the works of Margaret Blackbird when she went to Washington, because I always had that urge too, more than ever right now. I want to get to the president. I want to talk to the president. Because someone has to be the voices too, and especially for our children. So I may make that journey too. It's in my blood.
Well, this, anyway, so I did that once, and I did that timeline. And, some of it's pretty easy, and it helps you understand a lot of the different things that are in the book when you do it. And this is, Andrew Blackbird is my great, it was my great-grandfather's, his father was Gabriel Blackbird. And the father before that is a common father in my family. Okay, it was like there's a whole bunch of brothers that were all very, very important in our history. The Pakistan. Yep. Yeah. Well, many of us are related. When we go back that far, we're all related. Okay, and but there's some really neat things in here, including the as you get into the, he has this book. Anyway, you can also read that book online. If you go to Google Books, they have a photocopy of the original, and they also have a text version of it, and it's online. Yeah, Andrew Blackbird's book. And there's 2 books. The second book that he wrote was called The Indian Problem from the Indian's Point of View. And it's a really good book. It's very short, little pamphlet book, but it's very good. Both of those are available online. And I wanted to talk about that because he's my uncle way back, several generations ago.
Somebody that wrote that down emailed me, and I'll get that book and post it on our site.
Yep.
So we don't all have to do it.
The other thing I carry with me is the Constitution of the United States. And as a tribal leader, this was extremely important to carry around because, just like most American citizens don't attend their governmental functions, very few of them have ever read the Constitution. And this includes many of the people who have graduated with college degrees who are working in our senators' and congressmen's offices. And even if they did read it, they didn't read it with the eyes of looking at it from Indian country. So if you go into this document, go to Article 1, Section 8, and you get into the 3rd clause. It's called the Commerce Clause. And it's Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. And that's the acknowledgement in the U.S. Constitution of the pre-existent sovereignty of the tribal governments. So we don't get our sovereignty because the government gives it to us. We get it because it's inherent. We already have it.
So George Bush didn't give it to us?
He couldn't even define it. But as you go through this, that's like the fundamental basis in the Constitution. So there's a lot of people in Congress who don't understand that. And Congressman Dale Kildee from Flint, who was the sponsor of our legislation for reaffirmation of the tribe, started the Native American Caucus. He and J.D. Hayworth, who was a Republican, Dale's a Democrat, and J.D. is a Republican. He's from Arizona. But anyway, they started it. It's now the largest informational caucus in the U.S. Congress. And since the caucus has been formed, we've managed to, through educating people, not yet negative legislation passed on Indian issues for the most part. We haven't always got the things done we wanted, but we stopped a lot of terrible things from happening in terms of federal legislation. So it's been a very important thing, and that educating on that point. The second point in this Constitution is further on in Article 6 of the Constitution. It says, amongst other things, that this Constitution and the laws of the United States made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made, are the supreme law of the land. So Indian treaties are not some dusty old document. Those treaties stand beside the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. And those 2 points are critical. And I used to carry this around and carry it into all the professional offices and talk about that with the staff. I still do. And, I know a lot of other people do it. But because I had this, and they'd always give this, and they're proud of giving it the way usually on the back of it, it says, gift courtesy of such and such an office, Well, I had our Constitution of the tribe printed up in exactly the same size, same colors, same format, and on the back it says, Constitution provided to you by the executive branch of Little Tribe of Good Bands of Ottawa Indians. And what we did is then we passed this out. They give me one of theirs, I give them one of ours. And you know what? When you think about governance and you think about how that works, most of the people don't think of tribes as having, they don't understand that we're constitutional governments. They don't understand these things. And that we have this ability to help do that. So these are 2 things that I carry, and there's a lot of stuff out of those that are important in our everyday dealings. I brought another book. This is called The Art of Tradition. This book was published by Michigan State University Press. The authors are listed as Kira, Ettawageshik, and Ettawageshik. And that's Gertrude Kira, who was an ethnomusicologist from the University of Michigan. Jane Ettawageshik, my mother, who had her master's degree in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania and came to study the tribe, and married her chief informant, who was my father, and hence that I'm here, okay? And she did a lot of work. Her master's thesis was on the naming traditions within our culture and how those naming traditions had varied over periods of time, and she contrasted the present with a couple of different periods of history where people had written about that and talked about acculturation or lack of it and how that process worked. Well, then she went on with a grant from the American Philosophical Society to do postgraduate work, and that's where this book came from. And it's a manuscript that was finished in 1955, but never got published. Little pieces of it, a couple pieces got published, but it never got published until 3 years ago, when actually it was a 10-year process to get it published. But it contains a lot of things that are politically incorrect language. The word squaw is used, for instance, but we all use that. I grew up eating squaw bread, not fry bread. We no longer call it that, but that's what it was called at the time. Okay, And there were other politically incorrect terms that today are very incorrect, and we would not say them. But this manuscript has some of that political incorrectness in it. It was finished 50 years ago. But on the other hand, there's interviews with many of the elders from our family. And there's songs that are in here. There's stories. And I have one of them laid out here because let's see if I have it. I actually just got put in the wrong place. I don't have it right where I wanted it. But it's the story of the underground people. And it's written in Indian. And then there's an interlineal translation, which means that right below the Indian word, they're written the literal English word. And then, so the English is sort of, it's not in the normal order of our words. So if you read it, you have to read real fast in order to get the gist of what it is. And this goes clear back to that idea about reading that I started talking about when I first started talking about your short and long-term memories and how it relates to how you read and all of that stuff. But so I'm going to read the English because I don't speak the Indian well enough to read it. But I'm going to read this, and I want to let you know that everywhere that the word Ottawa appears in the English translation, it's Odawa in the Indian. And this was the Indian words were written by my grandfather in 1946, and then my father did this translation that was in the manuscript that then was part of this. And this story is not real long, but it's long ago while they were out scouting. Ottawas brought along they one little Indian. Set him free they, here, Ottawa land, he came to live. Undergrounder, thus he was that boy. He grew up in Ottawa. He became an in-law. Were born they babies. Became Ottawas they, thus therefore among Ottawa. While they were growing up, Undergrounder, their father, of Ottawa lady, but their mother. Certainly he was good man, hunter. He was good at scouting. He was good going with them scouters, Ottawa. He forgot he was an undergrounder. Wherefore they were called undergrounders. It was dug out in the ground where they lived, and a hollowed out place he lived. That is where they originate, as many Ettawageshik we are called, his sister, his brother, his uncle, his grandfather, and Ettawageshik, all of them, and Blackhawk, who are called here, Blackhawk is also Blackbird, and Blackhawk, who are called there, they changed homes, undergrounders, were called they Indians. They were not wild, those who were bad, and they were not. They raised what they would eat. They sought to learn, and law they made. Language, and they only they spoke. They had for totem Little Hawk. So then, once in a while, undergrounders, your ancestors, why they were called Pipigua, gradually they became many. If something one does wrong, the Ottawas then they bring to trial, and they gather together to judge their actions, together Ottawa leaders. Many undergrounders, your ancestors, men, they were chiefs before the war, Mackinac Island, 1812. And after the war, and until now recently. I can remember some of them. Paul Ettawageshik, he had for uncle Chief Wing, Blackhawk, Blackbird, but half his brother. And one Wakezu, Makadebanesi, his brother, Chief. He died at Manitoba, Canada, 1820. Him, but Makadebanesi, he assumed leadership over them, the Ottawas, although Pipigua, they were his ancestors, all over Crooked Tree Land. He died June 1861. Twice after it quaked, land, Crooked Tree Land, they left it. Ottawas, where they lived. Out west they went. So then over there, many, they died there. The land was too strange for them. Sawkaki, growing out, was then chief. He also, over there, he died there. So twice, Ottawas very greatly set back from their past number. First time disease, smallpox, almost killed them off, Crooked Tree Land. That's the story of the underground people, or the origin story for the Pipigua clan, of which Andrew Blackbird was a member, and the Ettawageshik family, and other families as well. Many of the Pipigua, although not all of the clans, but but a lot of us were living in St. Ignace in 1700 with the remnants of the Wendat, or the Hurons, who had been fought a war with the Iroquois and had lost, and they had come, those who survived came and lived at St. Ignace, and the French had a mission there, and a lot of the Pequot clan were living there, as well as the Hurons. And in 1701, they founded the city of Detroit, and many of these people moved there. The Ottawa who moved there, the Pequot, many of them moved into Ohio. Today there's Ottawa County and other places down just south of Detroit, downriver. And the Wendat, the Huron that moved there, are they still live in that area. Most of them moved into Anderson County, across the river into Ontario, but some still live downriver Detroit area. And the Ottawa that moved into Ohio signed a treaty, and they moved to Kansas, and they were in Kansas for a while. While there, they bequeathed for the treaty. They gave, I think, 20,000 acres to form a university called the Ottawa University that still exists today. It's in Kansas. But shortly thereafter, the tribe moved to Oklahoma. Today, they're the Ottawa of Oklahoma. They live near Miami, down in Miami. It's right off Interstate 44, I think, or whatever that interstate is. Okay, and there's around that town, there's a whole bunch of different tribes, one of which is the Ottawa of Oklahoma. And I talked to the chief down there 2 years ago, Chief Charlie Gauze, about this story. And he had done a dictionary of the language. I don't know if you've ever seen Charlie Gauze's dictionary, but, and so he's, but all of that's part of this story and part of this thing. Meanwhile, a number of the other people stayed here. And so we're all here as part of the community today. So. And this book has a lot of different interesting things. There's 2 ways to get it. One of them is to buy it directly from like McLean and Eakin, or someplace that's selling it at full retail, and it's $79, I think is the list on it. And it's but you can also buy it through Amazon. Last time I checked, it was about $53 plus shipping at Amazon. It's hardbound. I suggest buying it that way if you do, because it's a reference book that you'll have. And there have been a number of people reading this for a while, but it's all about here. Almost, there's a little bit about some of the other areas, but a substantial part of this is about this area, Traverse Bay.
And we all learned by watching Pickers that the book with the cover is more valuable than the book without the cover. You guys know what I'm talking about.
What's the title, Frank?
This book is called, well, the book is The Art of Tradition. The author is Kurath and Ettawageshik and Ettawageshik. K-U-R-A-T-H. And actually, if you really want to find the book, the book number is ISBN 978-0-87013 8140. That's 978-0-87013 8140. That's the book number.
Send me that and I'll post it so everybody doesn't have to remember it.
Yeah.
That'd be
So
easier.
do you need me to read it one more time? Okay. ISBN 978-0-87013 8140. And with that number, you can find it at any place.
Does anybody else have questions for Frank? Okay, so thank you, McGuire, for stopping by, Frank, and I'll turn off our recording.
the other tribes, when their tribal members write really super duper books about their tribes. You know, we have them, you know, like Ratner and some of these books, but I believe I can see something that we can done.
I've been too busy living stuff to write it, and so far, you know, I suppose if I,
You know, making it older years.
yeah, I mean, they may be already here, but I don't know. But I'm, you know, I've been doing so many different things that that I have not written a book yet. Vine Deloria told me to get me a publisher, and it encouraged me to write. And but then, you know, Vine walked on. Meanwhile, one of his friends, his son, told me that she'll still work with me, but to get a publisher if I wanted to write. But at this point, I've been literally too busy.
Have you seen George's book? He's got a great book. George Anthony.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Victoria, which is over there.
Yeah.
yeah,
More about Weaver Island?
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, George. I know he worked on that for years.
Yeah.
He's got enough material for a whole other book. So, you know, I'm not sure when and if that's going to get done, but it was good to get that, the one done that he did.
We're sure that you've got enough material to write a book.
Yeah, well,
It's,
You have a treasure right there if the sound comes out really
yeah.
yeah, we'll see
good. Yeah.
if I'm good enough, if I'm worthy.
Is that yours or does that belong to the college?
This one's the college's. I helped pay for this one because I wanted a better one than what they would pay for.
Because they're trying to, we have, like Mike Smith, was taking up.
Yeah. These are digital already, so all you got to do is just transfer right into your computer. You don't have to monkey around.
That's good, that's already.
Yeah.
And you know how they talk about the end. I heard that 20 years ago they went to some UN conference and tried to come out and warn people. Do you know anything about that? Or
I've heard some of the Hopi elders speak. There's a real interesting book called Book of the Hopi by Frank Waters that a number of Hopi elders a generation ago were very concerned about the longevity of their culture and the trends that were going. And they agreed to talk to Frank Waters, and they wrote down a lot of ceremonies and a lot of the history of the Hopi. And what?
The prophecy law that they have.
Yeah, and they have this, and of course that's part of their whole the culture. But you know where they ended up, how they ended up where they are right now. And the book says that they followed the door in the top of their head, and they had to go to all four directions. And when they got done, they had to come back and find the place that they needed to be. And when they followed the door in the top of their head, they did it, and that's how they ended up where they live today. And when you look at if you look at Eastern philosophy, there are different chakras on your body. Of course, like with the lotus, you know, at the top of your head, and the different centers on your body, power centers within your system. And Eastern philosophy has that in India and in Japan and other places. The Hopi have the top 5, exactly the same, but they're the top 5, not 7. And of those, the door on the top of your head is this connection with the Creator. And it's this, you know, and so when they say follow the door on the top of your head, that's what they're talking about. And so when they came out of the previous world into this world, and they were told that they had to travel these 4 directions. And they traveled those 4 directions as far as they could go on this continent and then came back. And along the way, various parts of them stopped off and stayed. And so they interacted with other places, people all over the continent. And but they ended up where they are now in the current thing. So within that context and within their worldview, the prophecies are part of that. And those prophecies from the Hopi deal with lack of balance and achieving balance. And when you're out of balance, bad things will happen. And there's something may happen if you don't do things to restore balance. And that's where you get into these things where You talk about end of the world prophecies or prophecies of these other things, and as you start getting into that, it has to do with restoring balance, which is part of our traditional teachings as well, as to live in balance. We have the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual, and the four direction teachings, and we're taught basically to stand in the middle, to be in the middle. And if we get too far in any one of these other directions, as we pull in that direction, it pulls us out of balance in the other directions. And so, and it doesn't just go in the directions, you can so you try to find that balance point. And as you find that, it helps create harmony in your life and harmony in the lives and the part around you, that where you live. And that harmony is sought after in the Navajo way, it's sought in the various cultures from all over North America. I've been, there's a real interesting document called The Message of the Living Spirit from the Convening of Indigenous People for the Healing of Mother Earth at the cultural territory of the Maya. It's a document that came from Palenque, Mexico, at a meeting that I attended with representatives from Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and the native peoples. About 150 of us drafted this document while we were there. We had to have simultaneous translators because English, French, and Spanish were being spoken, and we had to have little earphones and working with this in order to communicate adequately with everybody. And then we had a lot of native tongues for which sometimes there were no translators. But we put this document together that talks about balance, and we used earth, fire, and earth, fire, wind, and water. And so not only the physical, the mental, emotional, spiritual, but also these elements. Also you need to balance. And each one of these you can abuse, and each one you can strengthen. And it's through the choices that you make in your life. And as you do it personally, your family does it, your neighborhood, your community, your town, your village, your nation, the decisions that are made in each of those levels can either work towards harmony or be pulling away from harmony. And so when I think about those prophecies that they have, those prophecies are basically saying, this is what's going to happen if we don't live in harmony. These kind of things are going to come about. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's that's really what it's all about. And so when the Hopi leaders have come around and spoken at the United Nations, and when I was in Traverse City, they came and spoke up by Suttons Bay, some of them. I've heard them other places, and they've been at world gatherings where they take their message out, and basically the message is that in order to preserve human beings, we have to restore balance and harmony. And this is some of those teachings I was talking about earlier when I talked about the things that are part of our indigenous teachings that are important for this, and that we need to do those things. So that's what my understanding of this is. And my understanding may not be complete, but it's it's what I've come to understand in my life as I've talked with different people.
And tomorrow you're doing a presentation on climate change or something?
Tomorrow I'm giving testimony in regards to the federal recognition process and climate change as it relates to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The title of the hearing is Setting the Standards, Domestic Policy Implications of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. In other words, by endorsing this resolution, which has 46 different points within it that are made and numbered, by addressing those points, and when the United States and the other countries have endorsed this, what does that mean for the way that they're going to interact with the indigenous people who are living in the territory that they claim dominion over? And that has it's a big deal. This declaration is a big deal for the nation states of the world to have passed this and to have come to the point where they're willing to endorse this, even if they're not going to live by it right now. You know, the fact that they've endorsed it means that it's a step towards improving the relations. It's a step in the right direction, and we're trying to. Of course, then our goal is to try to have everybody live by those points as well. You know, I mean, it's one thing to make a nice statement, and then the next thing is to try to have people incorporate that into their laws. And
What's an
everything.
example of one? Again, an example.
Some of the examples. One of them is free access for border crossings for peoples who are on both sides of the border. You know, for instance, the Tohono O'odham, which are formerly the Papago tribe from Arizona, they have land on both sides of the Mexican-United States border. A substantial amount of land on both sides. So they have a population on both sides of that border. And there are significantly different governmental standards on both sides of the border. There's problems with crossing. There's problems with the fact that their own police have jurisdiction on this border. They're incredibly underfunded, and that particular stretch of land, I think, 75 miles or something, a lot of immigrants will try to use that because there's less police there, which means a lot of drug runners also try to use it. And so they have an incredible problem with public safety and the different issues that they need for all of these. And so the Tohono O'odham Nation has to deal with these issues. Well, the United States has signed on with this, talking about access across the borders, but under the previous administration, and it probably is not totally dead, is the idea of building that wall between the United States and Mexico. We're basically going to build a wall and essentially put minefields on both sides of it or something like that, to try to stop people. Well, we tried to build a wall once in the world. I mean, they built the wall in Berlin, and the Chinese built a wall, and that wall ultimately didn't work. And the Romans built a wall in England, and that wall really didn't work. And so, walls just don't really work that well. I mean, you have to solve the issues. And so what's going on is that, those are some of the things, the implications. That's one of the implications is on border crossing issues and issues of that sort. We have the same thing crossing into Canada with the visit relatives that are on Manitoulin Island and places. Other implications are the right to self-determination. Okay, the right to govern ourselves by our own customary, traditional, cultural laws, and however those are expressed. There's a lot of things, a lot of points in there. Relative to federal recognition, one of the points that I'm raising are that the process by which the United States has gone through recognizing tribes, basically developing diplomatic relations with the tribal government, is incredibly onerous, demeaning, lengthy, expensive, and it violates many of the principles for treatment of indigenous peoples that are within the Declaration. And so the process itself, just the length of time it takes, 50 years in many cases, to do things, is an injustice. That is one of the types of injustices that this Declaration is attempting to address internationally. So that's one of the things. As far as climate change goes, we have the right to be involved in decisions that are making that affect us. And so when it comes to with climate change, we're trying to adapt to the changing climate and understand how our cultures can adapt, and not argue about what's causing the climate change. Okay, that really is the moot point, because the fact is it's changing, and so we have to figure out how are we going to deal with that. I've seen lists that show that by 2050, this area of Michigan will no longer be the habitat for the sugar maple. So you could grow one in your yard if you plant it, but it's not going to naturally grow in the woods. So trees that are already there will still be there, but it's not going to want to grow there. It's going to move. It's going to follow the climate. And it's going to move out of this region. So the name for the sugar maple, the name for the maple is Neenatik, which is our tree. So what does that mean to our culture when our tree is not going to be here anymore? Okay? What are those the kind of implications we have to deal with? And so when it comes to climate change, there are, the declaration sets up standards for communication and for expectations of how the peoples will treat each other. And one of those would be that we work when they do different planning for how we're going to deal with the changing climate, that tribes be involved in that process, and that the indigenous peoples around the world be involved in that process, because we usually are the ones that are the most affected by the changing climate. Whole villages in the Arctic, because of the melting permafrost and because of the rising waters of the sea and the fact that there's less shore ice to protect the shore during the winter storms, the erosion is happening at an incredible pace. And villages that used to be 2 miles from the shore are very close to falling into the ocean. And they have to relocate these villages. And whole villages are there. One of the elders at this meeting in Mexico said, we saw this bird. He was from the Arctic. We saw this bird. We couldn't understand this bird. We hadn't ever seen this bird before. So we got a bird book. We had to look it up and see what kind of bird this was. It was a robin.
Oh, no.
Okay? So these are like real experiences of people who are changing things. I was at the Native Peoples, Native Homelands Climate Change Workshop 2, big long title. And NASA helped sponsor it. It was people from all over the continent who were there. And it was at Mystic Lake Casino in Prior Lake, Minnesota. And one of the things that we heard was from one of the native whaling captains in a community from the Arctic. And the way they showed us this video of the whole community working to harvest a whale, and how they speared it, and then how they pulled it up on the ice. They pulled it ashore, and how they carved it up, and then where they stored the food. And this would feed the community for months and months. And the way they stored the food is they dug these holes in the permafrost, put a door on it. They'd go down in, put everything would freeze. And it's a freezer. It's a natural freezer. Well, they showed us what's happening to their freezers. You open the door and it's filled with water. All the food's spoiled and it's filled with water because the permafrost is melting. The community is going to starve because they don't have food. And these are things that are happening. These kind of changes are actually physical things that are occurring right now, that are happening, that are going on around. There's places in the world where, because of the changing climate, the native people used to live up on the mountain. And those villages were safe, but they knew that if you went down into the lowlands and spent the night, you'd get sick. But what's happening is you got malaria. And since it's getting warmer, the zone where the mosquitoes live is climbing up the mountain, and it's now including many of the villages that used to be malaria-free. And this is changing climate. And so these things are things that I've heard about from the people who are living in these places, who are talking about them happening. And all of that stuff is stuff around. So when you deal with this declaration, it deals with how we interact with each other and how the nation states of the world who are members of the UN are dealing with the indigenous nations who are not members of the UN. How do we interact with each other? And so that's some of the things that, I get 5 minutes. It took me longer than 5 minutes to answer your question. So, I have to hit the high points. So. Any other questions?
Should we go ahead, Frank?